Due to a programming change, Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy will not be seen at the regularly scheduled time. Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy will air beginning at 2:37 a.m. Live from the IPFW campus, this is the 3rd District Congressional Debate on News Channel 15.
Good evening and welcome to the Reinhardt Music Center here on the campus of IPFW. Wayne TV is proud to partner with the Mike Downs Center for Indiana Politics, the Fort Wayne Women's Bureau, and the Fort Wayne League of Women Voters to bring you this one-hour debate between the candidates for Congress in Indiana's 3rd District. Good to have you along for the ride. I'm Mark Mellinger.
And I'm Heather Herron. We will be serving as the moderators for tonight's debate between the 3 candidates, Republican Marlin Stutzman, Libertarian Scott Wise, and Democrat Tom Hayhurst. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
We want to go over the ground rules briefly with you. We will be asking a question on a particular topic. Each of you will have 1 minute, 15 seconds to answer that question. Then we'll start over, and each of you will have the chance to ask a follow-up question of one of the other candidates of your choice. It must be germane to the topic that we've been discussing. That person will have the chance to answer that question and have 45 seconds to do so. So, with that in mind, let's get right to the questions.
Let's do. We drew beforehand, and Scott Wise will get the first question first. What specific ideas do you have for improving access to affordable health care and reducing health care costs?
Thank you. I think it's important that we have as much competition in health care as we can. An example I like to use is the LASIK eye surgery. When it came out, it was $5,000 to have your eye done. More and more people got involved in providing the procedure, and today you get it done for $1,000 or less. We have huge corporations that provide us our health care all across this country, and they do that in the name of saving costs for them, but that doesn't get passed on to the consumer. We need to have a system that allows competition, that encourages competition, that makes it so that there's not just one price for an MRI, but so that you can shop it. The other thing that goes along with that is a health savings account, and that'll help you shop it. I have one myself, and I can decide what services I have and what services that I don't need. It's not some bureaucrat in some insurance company a long ways away. Health savings accounts are the way to go. Competition will bring prices down as long as you and I can go out there and look around for the right price.
And Tom Hayhurst will be next to answer the question. What specific ideas do you have for improving access to affordable health care and reducing health care costs?
I am a firm believer that all Americans, every American needs affordable health care. I think there are a lot of ways of doing it. From the several years I spent on city council, I became very much an incrementalist. I believe we need to go step by step and always measure the outcome, measure the results of what we've done with regard to health care. First of all, I think it's best for the private sector to deliver as much health care as possible. When there are gaps, then maybe it makes sense for the government to become involved to some extent. I actually think that I've been upset about many details about last year's health care law. I believe, for instance, in this area, there are many free health clinics where individuals who have little or no income, have no health insurance at all, can go and receive health care. Why not include even free health clinics like Matthew 25 as a source of health care as part of the overall scheme? Also, to hold down costs, I'm a firm believer in competition. I think Scott hit the nail on the head there, especially within that massive over-bloated health care bill from last year. We need to make sure pharmaceutical companies and health insurance companies are required to compete vigorously if they want to participate at all, just like pharmaceutical companies have to do now in the when they provide medications for Veterans Administration.
And Marlin Stutzman.
Well, first of all, thank you for having us tonight. This is probably one of the most debated issues that we've discussed over the past year, and I think that our federal government really missed the ball on this one. We had the opportunity. I think we would all agree that there are problems with our health care system. I believe we have one of the greatest health care systems in the world. But what has happened is that the cost of medicine or health care has continually risen because of a federal government that keeps requiring more mandates and standards, at the same time not protecting those who actually provide health care. I think that several things that we should be doing and could have done but failed to do was that we should have started with lawsuit reform. Protect those doctors from frivolous lawsuits that only drive the cost of medicine up for you and I. I believe that also we should have addressed the insurance. Currently, insurance industries are only competing within each individual state. I think just like our auto industry, they should be competing across state lines, and that would drive the cost of insurance down, as well as I think we also need to address the cost of higher education costs. For those who come out of school with high education costs are only going to pass those costs on through health care, and I believe that once we address and get back to free market principles, that will help fix our health care system.
Okay, now each candidate is going to have a chance to ask a follow-up on this topic to one of his opponents, and Scott, we'll start with you again.
I would pose a question to Tom, Dr. Hayhurst. Mm-hmm. You mentioned incrementalism, and I know that it's come up before, and I just wonder what your thoughts are about what we've seen with incrementalism in terms of the government's encroachment upon our liberties and the government's feeling that it now gets to decide how we should live.
Well, I agree. I think the government has become onerous and too big, and with a $14 trillion national debt, that's a major problem. By the way, that's not a Republican or a Democrat problem. Half that $7 trillion was accumulated from 2000 to 2008, the rest from 2008 until now. It's a bipartisan Washington problem we need to reverse. I'm very much a guy that's going to be eager to work across the aisle, work with Republicans. My goal is to become the Scott Brown of the 3rd Congressional District. Just like he works with Democrats as a senator from Massachusetts, I'm going to work with Republicans across the aisle to solve problems that we have as regards federal government, including the one you just mentioned.
And Tom Hayhurst, you have a chance to continue talking and ask a follow-up.
Yeah, I certainly. I will ask a question of Mr. Stutzman. Mr. Stutzman, there are many individuals out there who have no wherewithal to obtain any health care. They may work for 60 hours a week, have no health insurance. How do we make sure those individuals have some level of health care in the real world?
Well, again, back to my opening comments, is we're, again, allowing the cost of medicine to skyrocket. And I was talking to a particular health care provider, and they said that he was telling me how their nurses spend almost 40% of their time at a nursing station filling out paperwork for the federal government. Do we want our doctors and nurses working for us as patients, or do we want them working for the federal government? If we get government out of the way, cost of insurance will then drop, so that way people can afford insurance instead of continuing to look to the federal government to provide insurance, which only manipulates the market.
And Marlin, you have a chance to ask a follow-up as well.
Yes, Dr. Hayhurst, you mentioned that this health care bill has got a lot of problems, but there's several videos out there where you are adamantly supporting the health care bill. Even before we knew what was in it, you were supporting a single-payer health care system, and it's the same thing that Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid were supporting in Washington. Do you still hold that position?
Let me say, first of all, that there's a bit of deja vu here because your prior employer, our disgraced Congressman Mark Souder, asked me exactly the same question, wanted to talk repeatedly about Nancy Pelosi like he thought he was running against Nancy Pelosi. You're running against me and Scott, not Nancy Pelosi. I think with regard to a couple of quotes out there, I'll emphasize strongly, I've always felt that all forms of health care in providing health care in the public and private sector should have been up for discussion before the House and the Senate, and an open discussion was blocked. I was merely talking about making sure that all options were discussed and all options were not discussed. I think that's bad government. When I was in city council, if anybody had a constructive idea, even if many didn't agree with it from the start, we'd said, we'll let you state your cause and tell us your concept.
All right, let's move on to the next question. This one will first be addressed to Dr. Hayhurst. What would you do, and if you can, please give us specific ideas to create and or save jobs in Northeast Indiana?
Well, you're getting right at something very important to me as a guy that grew up here in Northeast Indiana, loves this part of the world, and is really, really hurt deep inside when I, for instance, talked to somebody like a woman in Columbia City a few days ago who's had like 4 part-time jobs, and within the last 2 or 3 months she's lost all of her 4 part-time jobs. We know there are tens of thousands of folks out there that have great work ethic, and we need to get this economy turned around. I'm a firm believer that we need to hold down business taxes in the state of Indiana. And I want to point out that despite all of his rhetoric about taxes, Mr. Stutzman voted for a $700 million tax increase on business in the state of Indiana. That's basically a quote, close to a quote, from Dan Coates in the Indiana Chamber. That hurts business in this area. But going on from there, we definitely need to focus on improving our position with regard to international trade. We need to stop shipping so many jobs overseas, start shipping more products overseas. We need to ramp up education in the United States of America. Warren Buffett says, and Bill Gates say, a good education for every citizen in America will bring us better jobs. I'm really upset with Mr. Stutzman's $300 million cut to public education in Indiana. Thank you.
Thank you. Marlin Stutzman, if you could please address that.
Sure. Well, here we go again. You know, we're talking about throwing jabs at our opponent rather than talking about fixing problems. And the $700 million tax increase that Dr. Hayhurst is talking about, he's not telling the whole truth, because there's actually a larger tax cut for more businesses here in the state of Indiana. What we wanted to do with the unemployment insurance tax is to stop subsidizing those businesses who kept using unemployment insurance tax to subsidize salaries. So we said, let's raise the rate on them on the insurance premium, but let's lower the rate on those who don't use unemployment insurance. So there's actually a tax cut for almost 40,000 small businesses here in the state of Indiana. So Dr. Hayhurst, please start telling the whole truth. Maybe if you had 30 seconds to add to your TV spot, you might tell it. I don't know. But anyway, what we need to do, if we would get back to less regulation, lower taxes, the government doesn't create jobs. Unfortunately, too many people look to Washington, D.C. for them to create the jobs. Well, it's you and I, it's people that right here in our communities that put their money at risk and are willing to create the jobs that people work at, our neighbors and our friends can work at every day. And I was just visiting a business today, and you know what? He continually talks about why we are at a disadvantage globally because our government continues to raise taxes and raise regulations on businesses.
Scott Wise, what would you do to create or save jobs in Northeast Indiana?
Well, this is what we typically get out of government. We get the Democratic side and we get the Republican side, and what we don't have is an objective American side. We need to take an entirely different view on jobs and creating jobs in this country. I believe in free trade. I'm a free trade kind of guy, but I think that our companies in this country need a level playing field. It's not really fair to expect them to compete against companies that can pay 20 cents an hour or less for wages, or they're companies that don't have to have any environmental regulations. I saw in Hungary last week that some sludge pit broke open, and there's tons and tons of sludge went down into the Danube River and polluted everything. That wouldn't happen in this country. And our companies are forced to compete against companies that can do that kind of thing. We need to make it a strategic interest for our government to go about bringing the jobs back to this country. I mean, Ross Perot was right when he said it. It was a giant sucking sound. It just sucked all the manufacturing jobs out of this country. And what we've created in the meantime is a bunch of service jobs that really don't allow people to earn a living, to live life like they should. They don't really have the opportunity to pursue the American dream, because they're stuck in some dead-end $7 an hour job. Government should bring the jobs back. They should put the Americans back to work, and then we could all strive for the American dream.
Dr. Hayhurst, you now have a chance to ask a question of one of your opponents.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Mr. Wise. I'm happy to hear him talking about perhaps a little bit of back off from free trade, because even though the word free is a great word, I believe it has opened the door to ship millions of jobs out of Indiana. Tell me a little bit more about your thoughts about free trade versus other alternatives.
I think that the free trade is what this country is about. It's about capitalism. It's about the individual going out there and making a go of it. It's about creating something. It's about putting people to work, and it's about competing on that level playing field. I really believe that our government needs to look at the industries in this country and needs to make it a strategic point to bring the jobs back. I work in manufacturing. I've seen jobs outsourced. More disturbingly, I've seen components outsourced. We're buying components from all over the world, mostly China. You can tool up machining tools in China for 10% of what you can here in America. And it's cheaper for companies to go over there and buy tooling and have them make the parts and ship them to us than it is for us to make them here.
All right, Mr. Stutzman, you may ask a question.
Well, I believe that Mr. Wise has a good, I agree with his statement, so my question would be directed towards Dr. Hayhurst. He brings up free trade. According to his project Vote Smart questionnaire in 2006, he mentioned that he supported NAFTA, but today it sounds like he's opposing it. I'm just trying to figure out which Dr. Hayhurst am I running against this year?
You're running against the Dr. Hayhurst, the Tom Hayhurst here this year. It's not your ex-boss, Mark Souder, running against me or Nancy Pelosi, whoever he thought he was running against 4 years ago. Frankly, at that time, NAFTA was newer. It made some sense to me. I think it has clearly resulted in shipping a lot of jobs out of the country. The door is way too wide open to do that. We need to renegotiate our trade policy, whether it's NAFTA, CAFTA, our trade agreements with China. We need to be hard-nosed. As the head of Intel, Andy Grove, said recently, if we have to have a trade war, let's fight in behalf of America for American jobs. That'll help rebuild our economy here in Northeast Indiana.
All right, Mr. Wise.
Yes, Dr. Hayhurst, again, you bring up Mark Souder. I'm puzzled by that. Back when Mark Souder was disgraced, you mentioned that you wouldn't bring up anything like that in a campaign in terms of his dealings. But here it's up, and it keeps coming up, and he's not in this race.
I guess that's a question for me.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I mentioned Mr. Souder because he has presided over this congressional district during the last, 15, 16 years, during which we've taken a huge hit. Average incomes dropped from like 95 down to 75% of the national income, while Mr. Souder was clipping ribbons at ribbon cuttings. And actually, his employee, Mr. Stutzman, made $100,000. He made $100,000 working for Mr. Souder. I think that is an issue because Mr. Stutzman spends a lot of time telling us about holding down government expenditures. He was receiving money as a state legislator, money from the federal government as well.
Time for our next question, and it will go to Marlin Stutzman first. How effective do you feel the government's stimulus efforts have been?
I think they've actually been a disaster. I mean, I think the federal government had a real opportunity to get the economy moving again, and instead what they chose to do is they chose to spend almost $1 trillion worth of our tax dollars, and they were the ones that manipulated the markets, chose where to spend the money, rather than putting money back into the hands and the pockets of us as consumers and letting the consumer drive the economy. They chose to pick winners and losers. I believe that it was a failure from the beginning. We're seeing the failure today of it. Show me where jobs have been created. GE, who received millions of dollars, actually has cut thousands of jobs since they received those bailout or those stimulus dollars. I think that, again, we got to get back to accountability and let the American people. We are the ones that create jobs. It's not the government. If they want to do anything, they should have cut taxes on payroll on payroll taxes. Let the consumer have more money in their pocket. Let them go out, reduce their mortgage, pay for a new car, pay bills. And that'll, again, shore up and secure the credit markets rather than the federal government trying to pick who's going to win and who's going to lose.
Scott Wise.
I think the stimulus was a disaster. We spent $7 trillion. Some of it we're still sitting on projects that did no good. Most of them were short-term projects. They weren't long-term projects. What it did was protect the banks. And, yeah, we need banks. We don't want them to go under. But they said if we propped them up, we wouldn't have a credit crunch. Well, we had a credit crunch anyways. It's a bunch of crap like we always get from them. It wasn't anything about the free market. You know, that $7 trillion, if you divided it up, it's $20,000 for every man, woman, and child in this country. A man and woman and 2 kids, that's $80,000. How many mortgages would that pay off? And then people would have been ready to spend. It's Washington protecting the fat cats and giving them the benefit of it all, and we're left here holding the bag.
And Tom Hayhurst.
We should have had in place 15, 20 years ago a federal balanced budget amendment. The state of Indiana had to go bankrupt before we required a balanced budget in the state of Indiana. The U.S. government can go bankrupt, and we all know what that means for our kids and our grandkids. Balanced budget amendment, which I strongly support, should have been in place in the past. If that would have been in place in 2000, we had no federal debt. And then we went through the next 8 years and generated $7 or $8 trillion in federal debt. That wouldn't have happened. So balanced budget amendment, very important. We need to get that done. That'll protect us in the future. We've got a long way to go to dig our way out of a total of $14 billion of national debt. A balanced budget amendment is very important. I'm going to work on that from the day I'm sworn in next month in Congress. Thank you.
And Marlin Stutzman, you have a chance to ask the first follow-up question on the stimulus efforts.
Well, I'd like to ask Mr. Wise a question, but that answer there, Dr. Hayhurst, just does not make any sense. We here in Indiana have had a balanced budget amendment for a long time, and if it's only up to the people that are actually serving who have to abide by that law. I've actually supported a balanced budget amendment even in the Senate primary long before you did. I'm trying to figure out how are you saying then that a balanced budget amendment would have protected us from debt that we already had $1 trillion back in 1980?
We did not have in the year 2000, federal debt had basically been erased. Between 2000 and 2008, we generated $7 trillion of federal debt. We ran 2 wars, which I believe were necessary, and we can talk more about that. We ran 2 wars on red ink without funding them. We passed Medicare Part D without funding that. That is what generated all of the extreme debt that got us into this crisis. That and lack of regulation of financial institutions that have been tearing the heart out of our economy. In fact, I don't think we've gone far enough there yet with regard to protecting our economy in the future. Period.
And Scott Wise, you have a chance to ask a follow-up on the stimulus efforts.
Yes, I feel like I'm picking on the good doctor, and I don't mean to. But
I'm tough. I can take it.
All we get are political talking points. And I think it's ridiculous. Our country is in a position where we need to be more serious than that. I just pose a question to the doctor. Balanced budget amendment, really? I mean, do you and I and Marlin, do we need that? I mean, how about just doing it because it's the right thing to do?
I'd like to have seen that done way back a good 10, 12, 15 years ago. It didn't happen. Many states in the United States have balanced budget amendments. I think we've proven that we have way too many lifers in Congress in both parties. Let me emphasize that. It's not a Republican or Democratic problem. It's a bipartisan Washington problem. We have way too many lifers in Washington that want to just keep taxing and spending money. We've got to have a balanced budget amendment in place. That will protect us going on into the future. Then the liberals, the conservatives, the folks in the middle of the road, who I believe are in a good position to make most of the good decisions here in the United States of America, they can fight about how to use those dollars, but the number of dollars will be limited very specifically by a constitutional amendment. Thank you.
And Dr. Hayhurst, your follow-up.
Follow-up question? Yeah, for Mr. Stutzman. Mr. Stutzman, you've been talking a lot about tight budgets and being very careful with expenditures. I'd like to have you explain, speaking of expenditures, you made a black and white statement about farm subsidies, but you've accepted, and opposing them, you've accepted farm subsidies yourself, $900,000 worth. How do those fit? You're saying one thing, doing another.
Well, I mean, again, you're twisting a lot of the truths here, but by the federal law, the farmer, the producer, has to take the farm subsidy. You can't farm a landlord's land and put it in the landlord's name. You have to put it in the farmer's name. So by law, I have to take the subsidy. Again, this is where the federal government is manipulating a market, and I believe that I'm the only candidate right now that is saying that we need to eliminate the direct payment. I think we should keep a crop insurance program. I think we need to keep the safety net provisions that we currently have in place. But again, each one of us as Americans, and I agree with you, we have American problems, and we need to set aside the partisanship and deal with them. But I believe I'm the only one up here that's saying we should eliminate the direct payment, because I know how that is taking money away from my kids and my grandkids and only increasing the spending in Washington, D.C.
All right, Scott Wise, we will start this next question with you. What would you do to save the country's Social Security system?
That's a good question. It's in the red. It's going to be broke soon. I think that we have to look at it across the board, and we have to look at cuts. I think that it's wrong of us to consider taking something away from someone who's receiving it now or who's about to receive it. But I think we have to look at it in a responsible way and understand that it's not going to be there for Marlin and I. It's not going to be there for our kids, at least in a way that's going to mean anything. So it has to be revamped, and I think that we have to cut it so that it doesn't go under completely. And we need to make those cuts in the federal bureaucracy and keep making the payments to the people that are receiving them, and not take anything away from the people receiving Social Security now or who are about to receive it. We need to move people to different types of retirement plans, different types of investments. The stock market has grown. I'm a little worried about it right now. I'm a little worried about a lot of the economy. You can trust in some things, I think. Commodities are a good place. They'll go through the inflation problems that we may have soon. But Social Security needs to be worked on, and we need other options for us to retire on.
Dr. Hayhurst.
Social Security is a bedrock, very important program for the United States of America. Before Social Security, when an individual reached retirement age, there was often an abject poverty. I think it's a very solid plan. We need to work hard to strengthen Social Security. I do not think, as many of the fringe element does, that we should privatize Social Security. If Social Security had been privatized a few years ago, think what would have happened with the most recent stock market crash. That's where those dollars would have been. We'd have millions of people right now without any significant Social Security income. I'm a firm believer that we can make some very subtle adjustments in Social Security, which, by the way, will pay, even in the year 2075, I believe, something like 75% in adjusted dollars of what it would be if we didn't do what it would pay if we didn't do anything. If we made some subtle adjustments, frankly, I have a little gray hair. I'm on Social Security, not at age 65, after that. So we can make some subtle adjustments early on and save many, many dollars in the future. I'd also like to say with Scott, for whom I have great respect, when I talk about Mr. Stutzman saying one thing and doing another, it's not political. It's a black and white fact everybody needs to know about, period.
All right. Mr. Stutzman, if you'd address Social Security, please.
Yes. Well, at the current rate of spending that we have in Social Security, in 17 years, the fund's going to be broke. Unfortunately, we have politicians in Washington that keep raiding the fund and taking dollars from the fund, in which the promises were made to folks for many, many years that those dollars were going to be there for those who are retiring. I think that one of the important things that we need to do, we're one of the only countries that doesn't have caps and budgetary measures on our Social Security spending. It is just wide open. I believe we need to protect those dollars for those people who have made their retirement plans to retire with Social Security and make sure that those promises are fulfilled. I think that we also should look at those who don't need Social Security that are on it. Maybe those who have another IRA or other dollars that are available to them. Let's give them an option to forfeit their Social Security dollars for maybe a tax credit. Find creative ways that we can protect Social Security for those who are currently on it and are looking forward to years with it. And also for the younger generation, we're going to have to find ways to lessen the burden on the younger generations and finding a way that all of us who are in this together can give up a little bit so that in the long run we're not hurting the future of America.
All right, Mr. Wise, you have the opportunity to ask one of your opponents a question about Social Security.
I'll direct this one to Mr. Stutzman. If you take into account our unfunded liability for Social Security and other programs like that, our national debt moves closer to maybe $70 trillion, which is a number that's really hard for any of us to understand. How is it that you plan on facing down the Republican leadership and really having an impact on any of that?
Yes, well, I agree. I mean, you're exactly right with the number of entitlement dollars that are promised down the road. It's an enormous amount of dollars, and Republican leadership, I believe, has to step forward if we're going to do the right thing for our country currently and for the future of our kids and our grandkids. We're going to have to step up to the plate and make tough decisions, just like I did serving in the Indiana House of Representatives, just like we did in the Indiana Senate. We made tough budgetary cuts and made tough decisions to protect our budget. We're one of the only states in the country that has a balanced budget. I was one of the 6 who voted against a budget in the final minutes before the leadership called for a vote. I was one of 6 that voted against the budget because I believe that it spent too much money.
All right, Dr. Hayhurst, you may pose a question.
Scott, I wonder what your thoughts are about the concept of a balanced budget amendment to force some level of fiscal responsibility on our members of Congress who, and I think in a bipartisan sense, or honoring you, I think I should say, a tripartisan sense, are not doing the job they need to do to control spending.
Well, I don't really understand why it's necessary to force them to be responsible. They put themselves out there as the most responsible people in the room, and they go to Washington and run this country into the ground. And it is not the same country it was when I was a boy. And it is not going to be the same country in another 20 years. And it's up to us, you and I, and the two of you, to stand up and say this is enough. It's time for the government to behave. It's time to put away your toys and do the right thing.
All right. Mr. Stutzman, do you have a question regarding Social Security?
Well, after that answer, I'm going to pass.
All right, on to the next question then. Candidates, and this one will be going to Dr. Hayhurst first. Candidates often talk about family values, and in this state, they especially talk about Hoosier values as well. So I'm interested in knowing what do those terms mean to you, family values and Hoosier values, and how will it affect how you represent us in Congress?
Let me say, first of all, with regard to our prior interesting discussion regarding a balanced budget amendment, I think both members of both parties have proven for many, many years that they are not able to discipline themselves. We need to enforce discipline on those individuals. It's a pipe dream to think that's going to happen all of a sudden. We need to do it before the U.S. Treasury becomes bankrupt like the Indiana Treasury did way back in the 1800s. With regard to Hoosier values, as far as I'm concerned, Hoosier values relate to the three most important words I'm going to say the entire campaign: jobs, jobs, jobs. Good jobs in this area. And I grew up here. I remember this was a huge, strong manufacturing area. Those folks are still out there wanting jobs. We need to rebuild the economy of this area. One of the things we need to do, in addition to what I've mentioned before, is to work on clean energy jobs, such as, for instance, bringing passenger rail back. We're already building a lot of rail out at SDI, Steel Dynamics. It's a great job generator. It's good for the environment. Good jobs are the foundation for happy families, folks paying taxes, paying for schools. Don't forget that huge budget cut we had with schools. Paying for schools, getting all those things done for our society. Good jobs are the foundation. That's what we need to be focused on.
Marlin Stutzman.
Well, I'd agree that jobs are an important part of our social society. I mean, one of the things that is important for any family is to have a job. I mean, if you want to talk about a social issue, a job is a social issue. But at the same time, I think we're more than that. I think we're more than just about jobs. We're about our families. We're about life. We're about our communities. We believe that we have a higher obligation that we have to our communities, that we have to God, and that we have to our fellow man. And so I think that each one of us, even though we're so focused on our economy and on jobs, we also have a responsibility to each other, to treat each other with respect, to treat each other with kindness, to reach out to other people. And how can we help? Through our churches, through charities, through other organizations, rather than just looking to the government. Unfortunately, we have too many liberals that are looking to the government to be the answer to our problems, but instead, just like Ronald Reagan always said, the government isn't the answer to our problems. The government is the problem. We here in America have freedom. We have liberty. We have opportunities to take our own destiny in our own hands and make a better future for our families.
Scott Wise.
When I think about the values of our district here in Indiana, I think of my grandpa. And I remember when I was about 9 or 10 years old sitting at the table drinking coffee with him. Don't tell Grandma, she didn't want me drinking coffee. He was concerned then about the government control, about the government coming into our lives and telling us how to live. I think that the people in Northeast Indiana want to get the federal government out of their lives. They want to be able to stand up on their own 2 feet and go to work and provide for their families. They want those jobs. They want to go to work every day. But they have the independent spirit that says, I can take care of myself. I want to take care of myself. I don't need you coming in here and babysitting for me. And I really think that that's a big part of the values of this area. But I think that we need to, well, that's my answer.
And Tom Hayhurst, you have the chance to ask a follow-up question.
Yeah, I do want to ask a follow-up of Mr. Stutzman. Mr. Stutzman, one foundation for a stable society is to hold down taxes and hold down government expenditures. You have actually been receiving federal and state funds through 3 different sources for quite a few years. That concerns me greatly. It's like triple dipping into the federal and state pot. I think that needs to end. I'm curious about how you explain that action on your own part in the past.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. Actually, you've exaggerated the numbers again. It was a part-time job with Congressman Souder. It's a part-time legislature with the state of Indiana, and I had a part-time job with the farming operation. Believe me, we had a billboard sign during our state Senate campaign, and it said, Marlin Stutzman, he's working for us. Well, my brothers would often call me and say, we're glad to know that you're working for somebody because we know you're not working on the farm. And that is the explanation. And again, you're exaggerating the numbers. You're trying to throw out doubt and inaccurate numbers that people just aren't going to buy. All of those things they've been out in the open. They're public information, and you're trying to make something that's really out of nothing.
Okay, and Marlin Stutzman, you have a chance to ask a follow-up question as well.
What are we back to the question? I'm trying to remain germane to the question.
Yeah, it's right.
I don't know how
we're asking you to unpack what either family values or Hoosier values means to you and how it would affect your service in Congress.
Okay. Well, I guess my question would be to Mr. Wise. You ran as a Republican before, and I'd love to have you back. And but you know what? I think you're doing a tremendous job. I guess my question would be, what role do you view the federal government in family values, social conservative values?
It's none of their business.
And Scott Wise, you have a chance to ask a follow-up question as well.
I'll pass.
You'll pass, okay.
All right, thank you. We will begin, Mr. Stutzman, with you on the final question in this round. In a time of drastic budget cuts that have affected, as we've seen, many of our local school districts, what role do you think the federal government should play in public education? I
was just at a place today where a lady asked me that question, and it's so. This is a time where we as Americans really need to take a step back and look at how we are governed. We have the federal government. We have the state government. We have local government. And, education, I believe, is a local and state issue. It is in the Constitution. And we know better how to educate and what needs we have right here in Northeast Indiana for our kids in education. So I believe that the federal government, again, is taking way too much money to Washington and is not giving state and local governments the ability to do education right. Just to give you an example, at the beginning of the 1900s, the federal government only spent 40% of all tax dollars collected between all 3 branches of government, between the state, local, and then the federal government. Today, our federal government now spends twice as much money than what the local and state governments do combined. And so what's happening is our federal government keeps taxing us more and more and more, and we don't have the ability to control our own opportunities for education and for job creation because our federal government is becoming too top-heavy, and that's what I believe needs to stop in Washington. Stop the taxes and let the states control, states and local governments control education.
All right, Mr. Wise.
I agree with Marlin that education should be a state and local issue. I was really encouraged when we met last time when Marlin mentioned doing away with the Department of Education. I think that's a tremendous idea. Take all of that money and give it back to the states and local schools with just a couple strings. Teach the Constitution, teach the Bill of Rights, and teach civic responsibility. For most of my life, we've listened to this debate about education and the funding for it, and you're either for more money going into it every single year, or you don't want the kids to learn. And that's a ridiculous proposition. We all want the kids to learn. But the fact of the matter is we've poured more and more money into it every single year over my lifetime. Sometimes tremendously more amounts of money. And what are the results? You and I know it. We see the results of the standard test scores. We talk to our children. We know what they're learning or what they aren't learning. It's ridiculous what our schools have turned into. And in most parts, it's mandated by the federal government how they teach the kids. Bring it home, give us the money, we'll spend it right.
All right, Dr. Hayhurst.
A good sound education, as Warren Buffett has said and Bill Gates has said, is a foundation for rejuvenating our economy. The economy in Northeast Indiana has been hit terribly. I grew up here as a kid. I remember driving down any road in any county. There'd be all sorts of plants around. Those have disappeared because of our out-of-balance trade policy. Jobs are being shipped to China continually. We need to revamp our trade policy and get us back on the right track with regard to jobs for citizens in this region. With regard to education, I also think that there should be a very limited role at the federal level as regards education. But if you say we're going to run education on a local level and do a good job of it, how can you cut $300 million from the state public education budget? And by the way, everybody going to independent schools and parochial schools and other schools, they're doing okay. We're talking about kids who often don't have that much of a foundation economically. We've cut, Mr. Stutzman voted for this. Back off on federal involvement, that's fine with me to some extent. We have to support education within the state. Gutting $300 million out of the Indiana state education budget is not the right thing to do.
All right, Mr. Stutzman, if you'd like to ask a question regarding public education.
Yes, Dr. Hayhurst. What would you propose if we were supposed to have a balanced budget, would you have proposed then having an unbalanced budget in the state of Indiana instead of making cuts to education, even though they were the #1 priority, not to cut? That was the last thing that we cutted. Would you proposed with our balanced budget amendment to make cuts somewhere else, or where do you make up $300 million?
Here's where you make it up. Our last mini debate that we had, I don't think I even realized it was going to be a debate, but our last debate you talked and kind of bragged about supporting major moves that, quote, least really sold. How much time do I have? That said thank you, that leased and really sold an important part of an important highway, namely the Indiana Toll Road, to a foreign consortium for $3.8 billion. Many economists have said that was worth $11 billion. We should have gotten at least $10 billion out of it. We've gotten $10 billion, or we could have put $1 billion into education. I'd say, fine, let's make all the schools compete heavily against one another. Competition is good at every level. That'll drive up quality and drive down costs in every community school. But we could have taken $1 billion out of that $10 billion and plowed it into education and not gotten such a raw deal on major moves.
All right, Scott Weiss, do you have a question for one of the opponents?
I feel like I need a duck. I would pose it to Dr. Hayhurst. When we hear you answer all these questions, you sound an awful lot like Marlin and I. I kind of wonder what's going to happen when you go to Washington, D.C., and Harry Reid comes knocking, or Nancy Pelosi, or, Barack Obama may even grace you with his presence. And, I just wonder what's going to happen when they say, gee, Dr. Hayhurst, Congressman, we really need your vote on this. Are you still going to sound like Marlin and I?
Actually, now you're sounding more and more like Marlin, who keeps talking about Nancy Pelosi. You guys aren't running against Nancy Pelosi. You're running against Tom Hayhurst. I'm going to vote for a Speaker of the House who has good Hoosier values, period. There will be at least a couple hundred potential candidates for that position. I'm going to look at all of them. I'm an independent guy, absolutely black and white, and I'm going to be the Scott Brown of the 3rd Congressional District. I'm going to look for opportunities to work across party lines with Republicans, just like he has done the same with Democrats in the state of Massachusetts. We need many more independent thinkers in Washington, D.C. We have too many folks towing the party line, frankly, like Mr. Stutzman did in Indy, if you look at his votes. I'm going to be very independent, period, and I'm not going to do what those folks tell me to.
Thank you. Now, if we could please stay on the topic of public education, if you have a question, Dr. Hayhurst, that you would like to ask.
Thank you for reminding me about the topic. Well, in our current environment with a $300 million cut in public school funding and teachers being shuffled from class to class, classes are bigger and bigger and bigger in the school system. Mr. Stutzman, what do you think we need to do short term to straighten out this problem with more and more kids jammed into classrooms? It's a bad situation.
Well, I'm glad you asked, because I'm telling you, right now, our school system, this is what the problem is with government. We are always rewarding bad behavior. We never reward good behavior in this country. The federal government, or the state government currently, our funding formula, which I have fought to change to help make the money follow the student. You mentioned private schools a little bit ago. I believe the private school tuition is a lot less per student than what public school students receive on average across the state. In Gary, Indiana, right now, the student in Gary, Indiana receives almost $11,000 per student. Indianapolis Public Schools, they receive a little over $10,000 a student. Here in Northeast Indiana, on average, we're roughly $5,800 to $6,000 a student. Now, you cannot tell me that that is a fair system. I believe that we have to have fair funding formulas to treat all kids equally.
Okay, and that is the end of round one. It's complete. We're going to take a quick 1-minute break to give our candidates a chance to regroup.
And when we come back, what we're calling our lightning round, some quick hit questions for all of our candidates.
The political season is in full swing, and candidates are busy getting out their message, and you have the power to make sure they get your message.
So get out and vote to let your voice be heard loud and clear, because voting is a privilege, not to be taken lightly.
Now is the time to become a stronger part of this community.
So get out to vote on the direction you want to take.
My name is Casey. All my life, I knew I wanted to help others, but I didn't know how. AmeriCorps provided an outlet for me to be the change I want to see in the world.
News Channel 15 delivers election coverage you can count on air and online.
We cover the races that affect your community and talk to the candidates about the issues you care about.
At News Channel 15, we discuss the latest campaign strategies alongside a team of political analysts.
We work hard so that on Election Day, you have all the information you need to fill out the ballot.
When you want election coverage you can count on, experience the difference with News Channel 15. Brought to you by First Source Bank.
And welcome back to IPFW's Reinhardt Recital Hall. We will get back now to the questioning.
Yeah, Heather and I in this lightning round are going to ask questions geared toward a specific candidate. Each candidate is going to have about 30 seconds to answer that question.
All right, let's get to the first one. And I'd like to ask Dr. Hayhurst this question. What should
you can call me Tom, by the way.
Tom, thank you. What should the federal government do to tackle the issue of illegal immigration?
You know, I serve in the United States Air Force. I'm very intense about the security of the United States of America. We need to absolutely seal our southern, northern borders and our coast. We need to know everybody that comes into or out of this country, number one. We shouldn't just wait for that to get done, though. We need to simultaneously get, in a bipartisan fashion, get Republicans and Democrats together to work out a plan, and I'm totally against amnesty, but some plan to work to lead us to a long-term solution regarding those who are here illegally at this time.
Tom Hayhurst, should there be a path to citizenship for people who are in the country illegally now?
I think that would have to be left up to a bipartisan group talking about it. The only way I think that those who are here illegally can even get close to citizenship is if they know English well, know the Constitution forward and backward, have paid much money, I would say, for the services they've received without paying for them. And then they would have to possibly get to the back of the line to become citizens after all of the legal, L-E-G-A-L, immigrants. That's the only consideration in which, only area in which I would consider that to be reasonable and acceptable.
Marlin Stutzman, want to give that same question to you. Should there be a path to citizenship for people in the country illegally now?
Well, first of all, our federal government has again failed after the amnesty program back in the 1980s. And they have not sealed our border. They have not enforced the law. And at a time when the federal government is suing Arizona over an immigration bill simply because Arizona is asking the federal government to enforce the law, they are continually shirking their responsibilities. I believe what we have to do is seal the border. We cannot allow illegals to keep coming into the country. And I am not a round them up and ship them out type of person. I believe we need to take the politics out of this illegal immigration issue. And you can be here, but you cannot have the right to vote if you take the path to citizenship here in this country.
All right, Scott Wise. What letter grade would you give Barack Obama?
Look, I'd fail him. This is not a socialist country. This is not a country where we have central government control. We need individuals to step up and do the right thing. That includes our president. I'm very disturbed at the direction our country's taken, and it saddens me that we have so many people out there trying to convince us that we're doing the right thing.
Dr. Hayhurst, I'd like to ask you the same question. What letter grade would you give
I'd give him about
Obama?
a C at this point. I was around when John Kennedy was president. I remember the Bay of Pigs. He was a young guy. He was a president. He was just learning how to be a president. I think our president has learned many lessons. He's developing into a better leader. He's made numerous mistakes along the way and hasn't told us about all the good things that have happened For instance, global nuclear disarmament, 46 nations he got together to work on that. So I think he's making progress. I'll give him a C, maybe even a C+, but he has a long way to go.
Marlin Stutzman, name 2 or 3 specific federal programs you would cut to reduce spending.
I think, first of all, the Farm Bill is one that I've talked about, is one place that we need to cut spending. And I would propose cutting all government bureaucracies, including the White House and Congress, a 10% cut across the board. That is what we did here in Indiana, and I believe that that is the way you can shrink the amount of spending, is you take the dollars away from politicians and bureaucrats.
Tom Hayhurst, same question to you. 2 or 3 specific federal programs you would cut to reduce
I'll tell you 2 or 3 that are very specific, and they relate directly to something which is very dear to my heart, and that is making sure somehow that every American has affordable health care, however they get it. And that is, we need to make sure insurance companies are forced to compete rigorously against one another if they're going to have any role at all in health care. Right now, they're sucking 20% out of the health care system. And when Angela Braley got her $43 million bonus in Indy for Anthem, to me, that was $43 million of pap smears that were never done. Pharmaceutical companies also need to be required to compete as they with Medicare, as they now are by the Veterans Administration, saves billions.
Tom, I'd like to get your opinion on the Tea Party movement.
Sure. You know, many things that the Tea Party folks have to say make a lot of sense to me. I mean, I love my country. I'm so lucky to have been born here. I met my wife in the 3rd grade. We've had a great life in this country. I honor this country. Constitution, yeah, we have to honor the Constitution. Balanced budget, yeah, the Balanced Budget Amendment, that will force that upon us. I think some of what the Tea Party has said doesn't make a lot of sense. I talked to a veteran a while back at a parade. He said, get the government out of my health care. And I said, where do you get your health care? He said, the VA, equivalent to the British National Health System.
Marlin Stutzman, I believe when you all were talking about Social Security, nobody addressed raising the retirement age down the line for Social Security. Is that something you would support?
Yeah, actually, I did have it written down here in my notes and didn't have the time to mention it. But yes, I think we have to. I mean, we have to be realistic. People are living longer today, and that's due to people living healthier lifestyles. But at the same time, this is going to come down to economics. It's the same thing with the health care bill that Dr. Hayhurst would have supported, that our health care is now in the hands of a federal government that will ultimately come down to economics and who receives treatment and who doesn't.
Same question to you, Dr. Hayhurst. Would you support raising the retirement age?
I said that earlier in a very limited, careful way. If you do it earlier rather than to wait 10 more years, it has a very positive actuarial effect later on. Will help the Social Security Fund financially on into future years if we do it earlier. And that was done under the Reagan administration. It's worked. That's one step that we need to take.
Okay, time now for closing statements. Each candidate's going to get about a minute and a half.
And we begin that. We drew randomly at the beginning of the debate. Marlin Stutzman, you may go first.
Well, first of all, thank you to Wayne TV, as well as to the Mike Downs Center, as well as the other sponsors of the event tonight. I think that a debate is always healthy and helpful to the voters. I think that it's very important for us as we have the greatest opportunity in the world to have free and open elections, and this is a part of the process, and I'm thrilled to be a part of it. You know, as a farmer and as a father and a small business owner that comes from LaGrange County here in northeast Indiana, I could be more proud to be an American and to call myself a Hoosier. I think that we're facing some very tremendous, difficult times as a country and as a nation, and we're going to need to have strong leadership in Washington, D.C. I think that it's important that as we campaign, rather than having a campaign full of negative attacks on our opponents, let's have a campaign of ideas. Let's have a campaign that is looking to the future and how can we fix problems rather than attacking each other as opponents. I believe that as we move forward in this campaign and as we move forward in the future, that we as Americans have the answer to our problems. It is not a federal government. It is not the government that has answers to the problems that we have in this country. And I believe that each one of us has a responsibility. As someone mentioned earlier, this is not a Republican problem, a Democrat problem. We have American problems, and I'm anxious to go to Washington. I ask for your vote on November the 2nd.
All right, Tom Hayhurst, your final thought.
Start my time right now, right?
Yes.
Thanks very much. I won't mention all the organizations involved, but I greatly appreciate this opportunity. I've always, even when I was on City Council, I made a point to go to all sorts of forums and discussions, and I believe this is one other example of the way that government needs to work. I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in northeast Indiana. I love this area. I met my wife in 3rd grade. We had a hot romance. got married a few years later, now been married for 43 years, 2 daughters, 4 grandkids. Those 4 grandkids are a driving force in my running for U.S. Congress. I'm thinking a lot about the next 25, 50, 100 years in the U.S. Served in the USA. I served in the United States Air Force. I served in City Council. And I've been a medical doc in this community, in this region, for 35 years. I've heard a lot of stories from many, many folks. I want to tell you about, Mr. Stutzman said we have to talk about ideas. I'm going to tell you about some ideas that are out there that are fringe ideas that I think are very, very worrisome. He and his friends around the country like these ideas. Quote, get the government out of health care. That means getting the government out of Medicare. And Mr. Stutzman has made a specific comment that we need to be backing off and winding down Medicare, not just making it more efficient. We need to back off and wind down Medicare. I want everybody on Medicare, for whatever reason, to think about that. Also, we need to, period. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Scott Wise.
Thank you. I'm Scott Wise, and I want to be your congressman. I was educated in public schools and state universities in the School of Hard Knocks. I'm experienced in government. I'm experienced in business. I'm experienced in leadership. I've sweated on factory floors and job sites all over this district, building mobile homes and RVs, swimming pools, septic system, truck and auto parts. I've lost my job. I've been unemployed. I've been in debt and had to fight off foreclosure. I know what it's like to have to choose between buying food and clothes or paying the bills. I'm not beholden to either of the 2 major parties who twist the issues, pander for votes, and have betrayed this nation and its people. I'm committed to the Constitution. I'm steadfast in my convictions. And I will not be intimidated or corrupted. Please, vote for Scott Wise on November 2nd.
And we are out of time. Thank you once again, all 3 of you, for taking part in this debate tonight.
Yeah, and we'd also like to thank our partners, the Mike Downs Center for Indiana Politics, IPFW, the Fort Wayne Women's Bureau, and the Fort Wayne League of Women Voters.
And we want to, of course, remind our voters at home, election is just 3 weeks away. That's hard to believe.
It is.
Quickly approaching. If you'd like to find out information about all of the candidates, you can find that on our website, On Politics, by going to wayne.com.
Thank you so much again for being with us. For all of us here at Wayne TV, Mark Mellinger and Heather Herron wishing you a great evening. Good night. Nice job.
At Deal McComb & Sons Funeral Homes, high touch meets high...